Yep, split call, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was not going to rise to speak to this part of the bill, but I feel compelled to, given some of the aspersions Mr. Woodhouse was casting earlier in the first reading. Mr. Woodhouse was casting aspersions on me for wanting the elderly people of Dunedin to have their say. He didn't want the elderly people of Dunedin to have their say. In fact, he was apoplectic with rage at the thought that his own constituents should have a say on this legislation. Well, they're not actually his constituents, to be fair, but let's talk about the elderly of New Zealand, that they should have a say on this. Old folks do deserve a say on this legislation. This concerns the assets that are in their care. They are the assets that enable them to have a sense of independence and a sense of being their own person even as they go into aged care, and for their wider family to have that opportunity to pass something on from the hard work that they have done through their working lives. Those same old people also have a concern for intergenerational equity. The older folk that I talk to, certainly at the moment, are concerned for their children and particularly though for their grandchildren, as they see that their generation has many of their assets still intact, and those younger folk are missing out on educational opportunities that they feel should be afforded to them by many of the miserly changes that this government is making around tertiary education policy right now. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to challenge Mr. Woodhouse to go out and perhaps have a chat to the people at Monticello Rest Home and tell them he doesn't want them to have a say in terms of how these decisions are made. I want him to go out and talk to the people at Ross Home. I have my colleague Claire Curran saying she'll take him there if he doesn't know where to go. These rest homes in Dunedin have people in them who care about their own situation and care about the situation of their grandchildren, and they feel they should have a say in these pieces of legislation. Mrs. Curran's offering to take him to Oxford Court as well. Well, there we go. We've got a program of visits for Mr. Woodhouse. If he wants to hear whether old people have a say or should have a say or have an opinion on this legislation that his government is trying to ram through following the budget, because they believe that I shouldn't say stealing, Mr. Speaker, please excuse me, taking money from the elderly and taking money from the paper boys and paper girls of this country is their most urgent priority, because they don't want to have a debate about what's going on in the world outside of those easy targets. They don't want to have a say about real people's lives. They don't want to have a say about pro-growth tax measures that they could be putting through instead of this kind of grab. They don't want to have a talk about pro-export measures. In the previous bill, we saw that they were more concerned with actually putting red tape on businesses, and we've seen that they're just taking the money where it's easy to get. So my challenge is and remains with Mr. Woodhouse to go and ask those people whether they really are happy to miss out on having a say in this regard. This bill does affect real people, and this process is simply wrong. We have a select committee process for a reason. It allows people to weigh up the trade-offs that are being made in this bill and the very real effect that those trade-offs have in different people's lives. I challenge Mr. Woodhouse to get out there and talk to those people and see if they really would rather have a say. And my view is, I think they would.
Julianne Gender.
Mr. Speaker, tēnā koutou e te whare. I rise to take a short call on the Social Security Long-Term Residential Care Budget Measures Amendment Bill. Obviously, the Green Party will not be supporting, as my colleague Mr. Haig made clear earlier. And there's a number of reasons for that he outlined very well, I think. The problems with asset testing, why it's discriminatory. I rise to speak on this bill with a feeling of misgiving because this bill and other budget legislation is being rushed through under urgency. And in my short time in this House, Mr. Speaker, I've been really impressed by the quality of submissions and the level of engagement by knowledgeable, affected citizens in our legislative process. And I acknowledge that many of my colleagues have spoken about this already, but I'd like to say that an opportunity to come to Select Committee to explain how one will be affected by proposed legislative changes is not just a privilege, it's not just an opportunity to engage in the democratic process. It's actually a really useful tool for us as legislators. It gives us essential information which ensures that there's going to be a robust policy that's actually going to serve all New Zealanders, that we're taking into account all of the costs and all of the benefits and all of the trade-offs. So in this very, very brief regulatory impact statement on this bill, which was clearly just delivered a few days ago, not a lot of research went into it. As far as I can tell, it's just another example of bureaucrats in government departments being told to make choices about how we can find fiscal savings. And that's the entire objective. How can we find fiscal savings? There's no real consideration of what the human cost of it is. And really the only way to know that is to go out and talk to the people affected. And I'd like to see more of that in our legislation, that we're actually hearing from New Zealanders about how they're going to be affected. And I have to acknowledge what Jacinda Ardern said earlier, Ms. Jacinda Ardern, because we really do need to have a debate about the sustainability of superannuation, and we need to start having that debate now. And I imagine that if this national government, for example, was going to be forced to deal with that problem, which is a problem of debt, and it's interesting to hear them saying that we're not willing to engage with the problems that we're facing, when in fact it's about choices, and some of the debt problems we're facing have been created by this government's choices. And so while they're quite happy to spend billions on tax cuts for the rich, they're looking to find fiscal solutions elsewhere and savings elsewhere, and they're not willing to have a debate about superannuation. But if they were in government, which they probably won't be in 2020 when this starts to become a serious problem, it seems to me, given by the example that's been shown today, that what they would do is not engage with New Zealanders, not have a conversation about it, but just wait until budget day, rush it through under urgency without any sort of consideration or advance warning. And I think that's really unfortunate, and I think that, that's really all I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mike Sabin.
Mr. Speaker,
Great so far.